Hello there, my name's Sarah Joy Newton from Amethyst Connect, and this is just a really short demo to talk through Track My Carbon, which is an online carbon calculation tool. So I'm just going to share my screen over here, and here we have the Track My Carbon portal. When you first go to the home page, it asks you to sign up. You choose the size of your organisation, and then you pay a yearly subscription for your organisation, depending on the size of the organisation. So I've gone into calculate here, and I'm going to go into 2024 to put in my 2024 data. This is a demo platform, so I've already put in some calculations from previous years. So the way Track My Carbon works is it takes you through calculation by calculation on separate pages. Through Track My Carbon, you can input all the data for your Scope 1, Scope 2, and all 15 Scope 3 categories within it. We are also focusing this so that you can make a compliant carbon reduction plan in line with PPN 0621. So it complies with the government template that is required for tenders. So on each slide, each screen that you come to, if it says mandatory, that is currently mandatory for PPN 0621. PPN 0621 requires you to do Scope 1, Scope 2, and a subset of Scope 3 of the 15 categories. And that subset is 5 categories of waste, employee commuting, business travel, upstream transportation and distribution, and downstream transportation and distribution. So each of the pages that are mandatory, then you need to fill these in if you want a compliant carbon reduction plan for PPN 0621. Many people are starting to calculate further categories within Scope 3, and there is the ability within this portal to add those too. So the first one is about sites. So this is really, this is part of your Scope 1, and it would be all of your Scope 2. Scope 2 is all of your electricity that's purchased. So there is a tab here for electricity. If I wanted to add any other scopes, so we've got fuel oil, LPG, natural gas, propane, wood logs, those would come in, and water supply. They would all come into your Scope 1, because that's about any energy that you have for, or resources that you have for your sites, for your that you're consuming, and that will go into your Scope 1. So once we filled those in, you select the amount, kilowatts. You can also have the option to put in generated from renewable sources. Then we'll click on next, home working. Now this is not a mandatory field, however it links in to business travel and employee commuting in the way that you would work as an organisation. Because if you've got a lot of employees who are all working in the office and commuting, and then you send them all to work from home, that would just move your emissions. So we highly recommend at Track My Carbon that you include home working. So you just put in the number of hours, that's the total number of hours for all of your employees. So it might be that you need to do a survey on your employees as to how many of them work from home. And it's about making a reasonable judgment how many days a week that they would work from home on an average week, and then throughout the year. Company cars, this is the company cars that you own as an organisation. So they're the ones that you own or lease. And you would add in, there's an option here to put in the vehicle registration or a reference. Then this is employee owned vehicles. So this is for any cars that are owned by your employees, for which they then expense their mileage. And you would then put in the vehicle type, the fuel, how many miles over the year. And so let's just pop in a mileage there. And then with including well for tank, that's part of your extended Scope 3 emissions, so we recommend that you tick that box. Track My Carbon has all the emission factors from the government conversion factors that are released every year. They're released at the end of the summer every year, and we update Track My Carbon in the early autumn so that then they're ready for the following year's calculations. The calculations are done on calendar year, January through to December, because the conversion that matches then with the government conversion factors. Employee commuting, so we recommend you do a travel survey, and you do that as a snapshot of the organisation, and you do it once a year, and you use that data to then add in your employee commuting. And then you've got the vehicle type, so you've got public transport, so you've got your coaches, motorbike, rail, and cars here. So it's public transport and your vehicles as well. So you can see how your employees are travelling to work. Public transport and hire cars. So this is for your business travel, really. So if you have people are hiring cars, or they are going on rail journeys or getting taxis, you then just put in the number of miles for a year. It may well be that you are managing this through your employees' expenses, and this runs on a separate spreadsheet, and then you total it up and pop this into Track My Carbon at the end of the calendar year. Air travel, this is for any flights that are taken. So if you're familiar with your PPN 0621, the requirement at the moment is the UK boundary. So this is flights within the UK. If you're doing an extended carbon footprint, and then you would include all of your flights. And in 2027, when the requirement for the NHS, if you're an NHS supplier, is for global scope 3 emissions, then you would be including all of your in 26. At the end of 26, you'll be calculating all of your flights globally, as well as just the UK. But for now, it could just be the UK up until the year of 26, when you would need all of that data. Hotels, this is part of your business travel category within scope 3. Again, just in the UK, inside or outside London is the category, but in the platform, we've got the ability for you to do the whole of the world. But for PPN 0621, inside London or outside London. And then you just will put in the number of nights for the year for all of your team who have been staying away and expensing hotels. Delivery vehicles, this is for mileage for any delivery vehicles, and there is a drop-down list again for that. Freighting goods, so this is your upstream freighting goods. This is transportation of your products between your suppliers and your operating locations, or between facilities. You also need to be recording any emissions from your warehouses or distribution centres that are not owned by you as the reporting company, and they would be part of this category, the upstream freighting. But these need to be calculated and inputted into the other emissions tab under upstream transportation and distribution. So you would need to be asking your warehouse or distribution centre for your emissions for your products. Freighting goods downstream, so this is emissions associated with transportation and distribution of your products between your operating locations and the end customer. And again, if we add one here, you've got a list of different types of vehicles that you can put in there. Waste disposal, so this is any electrical items, metal, paper, plastics, refuse, and also water treatment. So your water disposal, your sewage goes into waste disposal. And then this is the other emissions tab that I spoke about a moment ago. So this gives you the opportunity, so where you may be given a total. So it might be that your courier company says to you in this year, you have used this number of emissions, and those are the emissions that you would be directly putting into the portal. So you could go into scope 3, you could then click on and say, okay, so these are my transportation and distribution that I have been given. And then I would put that in, and I would just put in the total carbon emissions that they have told me belong to me. We have got in scope 1, 2 and 3, so you would select which scope that you would put in. You would put in what the actual category is. So in scope 1, it just gives off whether it was your vehicles, air conditioning, or your facilities. Scope 3, it would then be your list of the different categories, and then you would put in the total. So the platform now gives you total versatility. And then I'm going to finish my calculations. If I scroll down, there's a comments box here. If I want to comment on anything to do with my emissions, it might be that I have increased or decreased my emissions through a particular reason, and I would put that in there. Also, if there are any zero emissions for any of the mandatory categories for my carbon reduction plan, I would put in why there are zero emissions, because that is a requirement for PPN 0621. So for example, if we have no employee vehicles and no other emissions associated to our sites other than electricity, I won't have any scope 1 emissions. So I would document that there are 0 scope 1 emissions due to no company cars and no other emissions associated with our premises other than electricity. And then I would finalise it. So I'm going to finalise it here. I'm going to say that my organisation's net zero is for 2045, and I'm going to reduce my carbon footprint by 90%, because industry standard, we know that 90% is about where we're able to do. We're never going to get to 0 emissions, and then it's accepted that we will offset the final 10%. And then I'm going to recalculate my targets. And then that means that I can now go to my action plan. So in the action plan, we have put in a custom action option where you would put in your own actions. And then there are a drop down list of suggestions just to guide you. Part of PPN 0621, the requirement is to have carbon reduction measures within your plan. And then once I have done that, that is then completed, and I then go to home. I then can go to export report, and within export report, it will then bring out, produce me a carbon reduction plan, which then I can sign and I can pop on my website, and on a prominent page, or ideally my home page, a link to that, because it does ask you in tenders for the URL link, and in Evergreen they ask for the URL link for your carbon reduction plan. And this then gives me the emissions listed out, scope 1, 2 and 3. This is the compliance template on the government platform. And then I've got any additional information has come through there. I've got my action plan, and then I've got my declaration and sign off, which is required by someone at the board. So as the director of Amethyst Connect, I will sign and date this and put that on my website. And then I will update my carbon reduction plan in the first quarter of every new calendar year. So thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time to watch the introduction to Track My Carbon. Please feel free to contact me if you have any other questions around using the platform. My number is 07810 452 194, and my email address is sarah@amethystconnect.co.uk, and I would look forward to hearing from you. And I hope that you enjoy using Track My Carbon as an easy, cost-effective way of managing and monitoring and measuring your carbon footprint. Thank you very much.